Hi, what if I told you that deep in the woods of northern Ohio, there once stood a place where children's laughter was said to echo long after they were gone? A place where the walls seemed to breathe, where whispers carried through the halls even after the last light went out. Tonight, we're opening the doors to that place, an orphanage that history tried to erase. Welcome to Historic Book, where hidden history meets haunting truth. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, because every day, we uncover stories that time buried, stories that don't rest easy. They called it the Light of Hope Orphanage, but the irony of that name would become chilling. Built at the turn of the century, it promised safety for lost children, a second chance for the forgotten. Yet, within a few short years, the institution gained a darker reputation. Whispers of cruelty, sickness, disappearances, and something else that no one could quite explain. By the time the last caretaker turned the key in the gate, locals had already begun calling it by another name, Gore Orphanage. The story begins in the quiet hills outside Vermilion, Ohio, where the forest folds over the ruins of what was once the grand stone building. Locals say that if you walk there at dusk, you'll still hear faint sobbing, the sound of small footsteps in the dirt, the creak of iron doors that haven't existed for a century. Historians tell a story of misguided charity and misfortune, but the townspeople tell something else. They speak of fire. They speak of screams. They speak of children who were never found. And while official records insist no tragedy of that scale ever occurred, there are details that don't add up. Missing files, forgotten graves, and letters written by those who swore the place was cursed long before the first child arrived. What really happened inside those walls? Was it simply a story that grew over time, or was there a truth too horrifying to keep in the open? At the edge of Vermilion, Ohio, the Light of Hope Orphanage rose from the soil in 1903, a sprawling brick structure surrounded by cornfields and heavy woods. To the locals, it seemed a noble dream, a sanctuary for abandoned children built by Reverend Johann Sprunger and his wife, Katerina. They claimed their mission was divine, that the orphans would grow up strong, moral, and loved. But the foundation itself carried a stain. The money that built the home came from a previous tragedy. Sprunger's earlier orphanage in Indiana had burned down, killing several children under his care. The official story said it was an accident, but survivors whispered that the doors had been locked that night. No one ever proved it, yet those rumors followed him to Ohio, like ash clinging to a black coat. When the first children arrived, they came barefoot and wide-eyed, carrying small suitcases and smaller hopes. Some were abandoned by parents lost to illness or drink. Others were simply unwanted. The Reverend's sermons filled the chapel every Sunday, preaching salvation through suffering. But the townsfolk who visited said the children never smiled, that their eyes seemed distant, trained to silence. By the end of the first year, 3 children had vanished from the roster without a trace. Sprunger told donors they'd been placed in other homes, but no paperwork was ever filed. And that was only the beginning. Winter brought sickness. The orphanage, built on damp ground, became a breeding place for fever. The doctor who came from Lorraine once wrote in his journal that he had never seen so many children so afraid to speak. They flinched when the Reverend entered the room. They refused to look at the attic windows. No one knew why. One of the older boys, Samuel, reportedly told a local shopkeeper that he heard crying from behind the walls at night. Not from the dormitories, but deeper, like inside the building itself. Days later, Samuel was gone. Sprunger said he ran away. But snow had fallen the night before, and there were no footprints leading away from the property. Neighbors began to avoid the road that passed the orphanage. They claimed they saw lights flickering through the woods when the chapel bell rang after midnight, though no one ever saw who rang it. The Reverend's sermons grew darker, more desperate, filled with talk of purging evil and sacrifice for redemption. And then came the spring flood of 1905, when the river behind the orphanage rose and unearthed something buried that was never supposed to be found. The flood of 1905 should have been ordinary, rains that soaked the fields, a swollen river spilling its banks. But when the Vermilion River surged through the woods behind the Light of Hope Orphanage, It tore away the earth that had held decades of silence. When the water receded, townsfolk found the ground split open, the roots of the trees exposed, and something else, small bones tangled in the mud. At first, they believed they were animal remains, perhaps livestock swept away by the current. But when the local doctor examined them, he said quietly, "These aren't from animals." They were small enough to fit inside his hand, delicate as twigs. Children's bones. Rumors spread faster than the current itself. Farmers began to whisper about the strange smoke that rose from the orphanage on moonless nights, about wagons arriving and leaving under tarps. When questioned, Reverend Sprunger dismissed the stories as gossip from idle minds. Yet, a few of the town's oldest residents swore they'd seen more graves behind the chapel than names on the orphanage register. They told of faint wailing that carried down the river after dark, as if the flood had freed not only the bones but the voices of the lost. Local lawmen investigated briefly, one visit, one report, and then nothing more. The orphanage was deemed a place of private religious authority. No further questions asked. Weeks later, the children began acting strange. Some refused to sleep. Others muttered that the river had woken the others. A caretaker, Mrs. Lutz, wrote a letter to her sister describing how toys moved during the night. Small wooden blocks stacked neatly by unseen hands, dolls sitting upright on their own. She begged to be released from her duties, but was told the Reverend would not let anyone leave before their term ended. Her final letter ended mid-sentence, as though someone had snatched the page before she could finish. She was never seen again. By summer, the orphanage was quieter than ever. The laughter of children that once drifted across the fields was gone. Travelers passing by said they saw the building glowing faintly at dusk, the windows pulsing with a dull red light. When they approached, it vanished, leaving only the smell of smoke. But there was no fire, at least, not yet. As the months passed, the Light of Hope Orphanage began to look less like a refuge and more like a fortress of secrets. Villagers whispered that Reverend Sprunger had changed. He preached less about mercy and more about obedience, and his Sunday services grew frantic, his voice cracking as if he were arguing with someone no one else could see. Visitors reported that the chapel smelled of kerosene and iron, and that the windows were painted shut from the inside. When questioned, the Reverend said it was to keep the devil's breath out. The phrase unsettled everyone, because nights in that valley were already heavy with fog and silence. One evening in late autumn, a farmhand delivering supplies claimed he saw lanterns moving behind the orphanage after midnight. He followed the glow toward the chapel and heard singing. Children's voices repeating assured him over and over. The melody was broken, slow, almost mechanical. When he looked through the window, the pews were empty. The sound, he swore, came from beneath the floor. He fled before dawn, refusing to return for his pay. When townspeople asked the Reverend about it the next day, he only smiled and said the children were learning to pray in their dreams. That phrase became legend in Vermilion, the children who prayed in their dreams. Local records confirm that Sprunger experimented with unusual religious routines, midnight devotions, long fasts, and isolation rooms he called reflection chambers. None of that was illegal, yet it fueled the growing sense that something inside the orphanage had curdled. By 1906, enrollment had dropped by half. Parents who once entrusted their children now avoided the Reverend's letters. The remaining staff spoke little, but one visitor, a traveling nurse, later testified that she found small handprints scorched onto the chapel walls as if from candles held too close. Sprunger dismissed them as soot marks. Historians today believe these stories were born from fear and misinterpretation, but the folklore refuses to die. Even now, hikers exploring the ruins claim they hear faint humming under the ground where the chapel once stood. Scientists say it's the river moving through limestone. Locals insist it's the echo of those night hymns, the voices of children who, according to rumor, never left the Light of Hope. Whatever the truth, the legend marked the beginning of the orphanage's end. By 1907, the Light of Hope Orphanage had become a name spoken only in whispers. Donations stopped coming. Families stopped visiting. The once busy courtyard lay empty, its swings rusted, its garden overgrown with thistle and vine. Reverend Sprunger, however, refused to leave. He preached to the few remaining children every dawn, insisting that salvation was near. What he meant by that no one truly understood. Some said he believed the world itself would end in fire and that only the pure in heart would survive. Others claimed he was haunted by the ghosts of the Indiana fire and saw them again in every flicker of the orphanage lamps. Whatever truth existed inside his mind was known only to him and the walls that listened. That winter, strange lights returned to the woods. Farmers along Gore Road swore they saw a glow through the trees, like a furnace burning underground. A postman said he smelled smoke, though no chimney drew it. And one bitter January morning, a traveler passing by reported a thick haze hanging above the orphanage roof, rising in slow spirals. When he went to the gate to investigate, he found the lock frozen, the bell rope cut, and no sound from within. He called out. Only the wind answered. By dusk, the haze had vanished, but the smell of burning lingered for days. Officially, no fire was ever recorded at the Light of Hope Orphanage. Newspapers from that year mention only structural decay and abandonment. Yet those who lived nearby tell a different story. They recall the nights when the ground itself seemed to glow and when the air filled with the faint cry of a child calling for her mother. After that winter, the Reverend disappeared. His personal Bible was later found on the chapel steps, open to a page scorched at the edges, and the little ones shall be taken unto the light. It was the last written trace of him. When county officials finally entered the property months later, they found the building empty, beds unmade, meals untouched. The clock stopped at 3:17 a.m. There were no children, no staff, no footprints leading away. Records list the orphanage as vacated, and the land sold quietly a year later. But to this day, no burial certificates, no transfer papers, and no relocation documents have ever surfaced. Whether those children were moved elsewhere or lost entirely, history offers only silence, and in Vermilion, that silence still feels alive. When county investigators finally arrived, the Light of Hope Orphanage was already a carcass of stone and echo. The wooden floors were warped by moisture, the chapel pews splintered by rot, and the walls blackened by something no one could quite identify. Ash, maybe, or mold that had turned the color of soot. Sheriff Reynolds, who led the inquiry, noted in his logbook that the air inside the dormitories was unbearably sweet, like burned sugar and perfume. He found toys still arranged neatly on each child's bed and small shoes lined up by the door. There were no signs of violence, no traces of bodies, only the suggestion that everyone had left in the same hour and never returned. The Reverend's office told a different story. On his desk sat an open journal filled with verses rewritten in his own hand, each crossed out, rewritten, and crossed again as though he were arguing with Scripture itself. The final page read, "They are not gone. They are with the light." Beside it lay the keys to the dormitory and a small wooden crucifix charred black at the base. The investigators sealed the building, citing health hazards and religious confidentiality. The report was filed under routine closure. Yet word spread quickly through Vermilion that something unnatural had taken place, that the Reverend's obsession had gone beyond faith into something darker, something that could not be written in a police report. As weeks turned to months, locals began treating the site as forbidden ground. Hunters refused to cross the old property line, claiming they heard children laughing deep in the trees, though no children lived for miles. A group of teenagers who ventured into the ruins one summer night said the air turned suddenly cold and the smell of smoke filled their lungs. When they turned back, one boy was missing for almost an hour. When they found him, he was kneeling in the chapel doorway, eyes wide open, whispering, "They told me to stay." After that, no one dared return after sundown. Newspapers turned the silence into story. "Children vanish from Ohio Orphanage." One headline read, though no official evidence supported the claim. By the time the 20th century drew to a close, the legend had evolved. The Reverend had burned the children in a secret ritual, The orphans had been buried under the chapel. The flood had exposed their bones. Every version contradicted the last, yet each felt true in the way nightmares do. And with each retelling, the name Gore Orphanage grew darker, until history itself could no longer separate fact from fear. Decades later, curiosity replaced fear. By the 1950s, the orphanage had crumbled into ruins, swallowed by vines and time, yet people kept coming. Ghost hunters, historians, and local teenagers all arrived with flashlights and tape recorders, chasing echoes of the past. The first formal investigation was led by a professor from Oberlin College who hoped to debunk the rumors once and for all. He found fragments of hymn books, rusted bed frames, and a single cornerstone etched with a faint cross. No graves, no bones, nothing to confirm the nightmare stories that locals swore by. Still, the team reported a heavy stillness in the chapel ruins, a pressure in the air that silenced every word. One researcher fainted and later claimed to have heard a child's voice say, "You shouldn't be here." Science called it suggestion. Faith called it warning. Historians traced the paper trail of the Light of Hope to Cleveland archives, letters between Reverend Sprunger and donors, lists of supplies, and the orphan roster that ended abruptly in 1907. No transfer documents were found. Some names simply stopped appearing anywhere. No adoptions, no new census entries, nothing. The missing files deepened the myth. Perhaps they were lost in the flood, perhaps destroyed when the property changed hands. Whatever the reason, the gaps in record felt intentional, like someone had erased the end of a sentence that the world was never meant to read. By the 1970s, the site had become Ohio's most infamous ghost story. Tourists left offerings, dolls, coins, and photographs of missing children from other towns, believing the spirits there might help find their own lost ones. Locals warned against it. They said every item left on the ground vanished by morning, as if the earth consumed anything meant to disturb its rest. Paranormal groups filmed the ruins at night, their cameras flickering with static whenever they pointed toward the foundation's center. Some dismissed it as bad wiring. Others swore it was proof of lingering energy. None stayed until dawn. Today, the legend of the Ohio Orphan is woven into state folklore, retold around campfires and on ghost tours. The town of Vermilion keeps official silence. No memorials, no plaques, just trees guarding the forgotten path. But every Halloween, someone leaves a single candle near the old gate, its flame trembling in the wind until it burns itself out. Whether it's tribute, superstition, or confession, no one knows. What remains is the question that keeps the story alive. If nothing truly happened there, why does the place still feel like it remembers? By the early 2000s, technology brought new eyes to the ruins. Paranormal researchers arrived armed with thermal cameras, electromagnetic detectors, and drones capable of scanning the forest canopy above Gore Road. Their goal was simple: to capture proof, any proof, of what generations had whispered about. The first investigation took place on a cold October night. The footage shows 3 people walking through the site, flashlights cutting through fog like blades. For the first hour, nothing happens, just wind, creaking branches, the faint rush of the Vermilion River nearby. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., the same hour the orphanage clock was said to have stopped, a high-pitched sound fills the audio, like a child humming under breath. One investigator whispers, "Did you hear that?" The camera shakes, the light flickers, and then the recording cuts out. When the footage was recovered, experts confirmed there was no signal interference. The sound was real but inexplicable. A historian who reviewed the tape recognized the tune. It matched an old hymn once sung in orphanages across Ohio, "Lead Us into Light." Skeptics claimed it was a coincidence. Believers saw it as the first tangible proof that the children of Light of Hope, or something left in their place, still lingered. The story went viral, drawing new crowds to the site. For the first time in decades, the ruins were alive again, with flashlights, camera flashes, and whispered prayers. But the surge of attention came with consequences. In 2006, a group of amateur ghost hunters reported strange burns appearing on their arms after leaving the grounds. Thin, circular marks like candle flames pressed against the skin. Medical tests found no chemical cause. One of them, a woman named Claire Reeves, said she dreamt that night of a girl standing beside her bed, clutching a broken doll. The girl whispered, "You shouldn't have woken us." Claire never returned to Vermilion. Local authorities closed the area soon after, citing vandalism and safety hazards, but that didn't stop the stories. Visitors still sneak past the barricades, leaving notes, toys, and sometimes photographs of their own lost loved ones. In the morning, the offerings are gone, as if something or someone had collected them overnight. Scientists say raccoons or vandals are to blame. Those who've seen the faint glow beyond the trees say otherwise. They claim the children are still there, watching quietly from the edge of the forest, waiting for the rest of the world to remember them. Every legend leaves a mark, but the story of the Ohio Orphanage seems to mark the people who chase it. Psychologists who've studied the phenomenon call it the echo effect, a state of obsession where curiosity slowly turns to fixation. Investigators, historians, even casual visitors describe the same progression. First fascination, then dread, then dreams. They all dream of the same thing, a long hallway lined with doors that never open, and somewhere at the end, faint children's laughter. Those who've spent nights researching the Light of Hope archives say they begin hearing soft tapping in their homes, always at 3:17 a.m. For some, the noise stops once they leave the project. For others, it never does. One local journalist, David Heller, wrote an expose in 2011 titled "The Myth of Gore Orphanage: How Fear Built a Legend." The article was skeptical, rational, full of dates and debunking. But readers noticed something odd. In the online version, the final paragraph appeared corrupted, its text replaced by a series of repeating words. Light, 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 light. The server log showed no edit history, no virus, no traceable error. When asked about it later, Heller admitted he hadn't uploaded that draft at all. He'd deleted it before publishing. His version ended normally, but the file that appeared online wasn't the same one. Afterward, he refused to speak about the orphanage again. Researchers who've dug deeper into the archives claim a chilling pattern connects the modern investigators to the original staff. Many report sudden insomnia, night terrors, or faint humming that follows them long after leaving the site. A historian named Evelyn Cross spent 2 years cataloging church records from Reverend Sprunger's congregation. In her notes, she wrote, "The more I read his sermons, the more I hear the echo. It's not in the text, it's in the silence between the lines." She withdrew from her research soon after and later confessed in an interview that she kept hearing children giggling whenever she walked past a church. Experts dismiss these accounts as stress and self-suggestion, yet the coincidences keep piling up. The legend seems to feed on attention. The more people try to explain it, the more it grows, adapting, twisting, becoming harder to disprove. Whether it's a ghost story or a collective hallucination, no one can say. But one truth remains: the Ohio Orphanage does not like to be forgotten, and those who try to erase it often end up part of its story. By 2015, the mystery surrounding the Ohio Orphanage took a darker turn. A small documentary crew arrived in Vermilion to film a low-budget series about forgotten American folklore. They called it Children of the Ashes. Their focus was historical, no ghost hunting, just interviews and local archives. The team of 5 set up camp near the old foundation, documenting the ruins by day and reviewing footage in their rented cabin by night. For 3 days, nothing strange occurred. On the 4th, one of the crew, sound engineer Patrick Lowe, recorded a faint echo under every interview. When played in isolation, the background noise resembled whispers, indistinct but rhythmic, almost like prayer. Patrick insisted the pattern repeated exactly every 17 seconds, no matter where they filmed. He joked that maybe the kids from the orphanage were still reciting their hymns. That night, he vanished. Search teams found his camera near the riverbank, still recording, the lens aimed toward the dark water. The audio captured only one phrase, spoken in Patrick's voice, though no one saw him say it. "They're not gone." His body was never recovered. The remaining crew abandoned the project and released their footage online, where it spread across the internet in weeks. Viewers pointed out faint shapes moving between the trees, faces in the fog. Others accused the team of staging everything for publicity. Still, the official report listed his disappearance as unexplained. When investigators reviewed the files from the shoot, they noticed something stranger. Timestamps on the recordings jumped backward, small increments of 17 seconds erased at random, as if time itself had stuttered. Digital forensics couldn't explain it. The equipment was intact, and the glitch appeared only on footage recorded near the chapel ruins. Soon after, locals began reporting new sightings: lantern lights in the woods, faint humming under the bridge, and the sound of children's laughter echoing across the river at dawn. Old-timers said the orphanage was awake again, feeding on attention the way a fire feeds on air. Experts continue to debate whether the legend's persistence is the product of coincidence, psychology, or something older than either. But each time someone tries to close the story, it seems to reopen itself, drawing the curious and the reckless back into its orbit. The Ohio Orphanage stands today as nothing more than stone and soil, yet it exerts a pull stronger than logic. It's as if the land itself remembers the missing, whether they were ever real or merely imagined into being by generations of fear. In 2018, a local historian named Rachel Marrow discovered a sealed chest in the attic of a church rectory not far from Vermilion. Inside were a stack of letters, over 30, all written in the same meticulous handwriting and signed by Jacob Sprunger, the Reverend's brother. These letters had never been cataloged or published. They painted a portrait of a man unraveling under guilt. One note dated March 2, 1907 read, "He says he hears them when he prays, the ones he could not save. He says the light told him what must be done." Later letters grew desperate. "He believes the children carry sin in their blood," one read, "and that only by returning them to the flame can their souls be made pure." Rachel shared her findings with a university archive, but before the letters could be fully analyzed, the box went missing from storage. No forced entry, no broken locks, just gone. The university downplayed the incident as a clerical error, but a janitor reported hearing a child crying in the basement the same night the letters vanished. When police searched, they found nothing. Only the smell of burnt paper lingered. What remains of those letters, scanned copies and transcribed fragments, suggests Sprunger may have believed the flood of 1905 was divine punishment, a cleansing that spared only the faithful. Whether he acted on those beliefs, no evidence survives. But for historians, the letters are the closest glimpse into the mind of a man who stood at the center of Ohio's most haunting legend. Rachel herself refused to speak about the discovery again. Colleagues said she became withdrawn, insisting that someone, or something, was watching her research. She left Vermilion abruptly, moving across the country. Months later, she sent a final email to a friend that read simply, "I've started hearing them too." After that, she disappeared from academic circles altogether. Some say she abandoned her work. Others whisper that she joined the growing list of those who'd gotten too close to the orphanage's story. The letters reignited public fascination with the site. Documentaries, podcasts, and amateur sleuths flooded social media with theories. Some believed the Reverend's writings proved he had carried out ritual sacrifices. Others argued he suffered from delusions and hysteria born of grief. But one detail remained the same across every telling. The children's names on the final orphan roster, dated early 1907, never appeared in any other Ohio record again. No adoption papers, no death certificates, nothing. The state called it a bureaucratic loss. The locals called it something else: the night the light took them all. As the years passed, the story of the Ohio Orphanage refused to stay buried. By the 1920s, tales of the light that took the children began surfacing hundreds of miles away, in Pennsylvania, Illinois, even as far as Maine. Always the same pattern: whispers of missing children, faint music at night, a preacher who claimed to see salvation in flame. Folklorists noticed the similarities and traced them back to the same source: Vermilion, Ohio. It seemed the story had grown roots that reached across the country, spreading like a sickness of memory. Some researchers believe these new accounts were echoes of the Gore Orphanage myth, distorted by time and fear. But others argued the opposite, that the Ohio tragedy had been part of something much older, a pattern of ritual purification that appeared wherever isolation and faith mixed too deeply. By the 1950s, the legend had entered pop culture. Horror magazines published fictionalized versions, radio hosts spoke of the Children of the Light, and traveling carnivals used the orphanage's name as a haunted attraction. Each retelling drifted further from history, yet the emotional truth remained, the sense of loss, guilt, and divine obsession. Strangely, people who visited these carnival exhibits often reported feeling physically ill afterward, nausea, dizziness, a ringing in the ears. Doctors blamed smoke machines and anxiety, but a few investigators found electromagnetic spikes near replicas of the orphanage's chapel, as if even imitation could stir something real. By the early 2000s, the orphanage's legend had become internet folklore, a blend of truth, invention, and digital haunting. On forums and message boards, users began posting strange coincidences, photographs from abandoned buildings that showed faint childlike figures, all captured at exactly 3:17 a.m. Some of these photos were later debunked as edited, but others had no explanation. One image, taken by a hiker near Vermilion, showed the outline of a small hand pressed against the inside of his car window. He was alone. The metadata confirmed the timestamp, 3:17 a.m. Today, the story continues to evolve, shape-shifting through documentaries, podcasts, and urban legends told in classrooms and online horror channels. Yet, beneath every version, the same question lingers. How can a story so old still change those who tell it? Paranormal researchers call it narrative contagion, the idea that certain stories infect the mind, bending perception until you start to see what others once feared. Whether you call it legend, curse, or memory, the tale of the Ohio Orphanage still whispers in the dark corners of American folklore. It isn't just remembered, it remembers you back. The ruins of the orphanage remain hidden deep in the Vermilion woods, covered in moss and silence. Locals say that if you walk there after midnight, the ground seems to hum beneath your feet, soft, steady, like a heartbeat. The trees are unusually close together, their roots tangled over broken bricks and rusted nails. Few visitors stay long. Those who do often report the same thing: a sudden stillness, the forest going quiet, and then a faint sound, footsteps, too light to be adult, circling just behind them. One man, a park ranger named Tommy Greaves, said he was inspecting the area when his flashlight began to flicker. He thought it was dying until he realized it was pulsing, blinking in rhythm with something he could hear in the distance. A soft hum, the same melody caught in old recordings of the orphanage's hymns. When Tommy returned to his truck, the hood was covered in tiny handprints made of ash. He quit the next morning. His official report lists structural instability as the reason for his resignation, but his coworkers tell another story, that he refused to drive past Gore Road again. He wasn't the only one. Hikers have described seeing the figure of a child standing in the tree line, motionless, watching. Cameras fail near the ruins. Compasses spin. Some call it magnetic interference. Others call it the residue of grief. But those who've stood there say it feels alive, as if the land itself is breathing beneath the weight of what it remembers. Despite the area being fenced off, people still find ways to enter. Paranormal enthusiasts, thrill seekers, even college students daring each other to spend a night inside the ruins. Most leave within an hour, shaken but unharmed. A few leave something behind: a toy, a coin, a note for the lost ones. Locals warn against it. They say the forest keeps whatever is offered. And sometimes, when visitors return days later, they find their own belongings waiting for them at the gate, placed neatly in a row. No one admits to touching them. No footprints mark the ground. It's as though the forest gives back what it doesn't want. Witnesses have reported hearing faint weeping echoing from the river. Always around 3:17 a.m. Police have investigated countless times, only to find the banks empty. Yet audio recordings taken there reveal whispers, sometimes a single word repeated over and over, light. Whether it's wind, water, or something older, no one knows. But as historians, ghost hunters, and skeptics continue to argue, one truth has become impossible to ignore. Whatever happened at the Light of Hope Orphanage, the ground where it stood has never truly gone silent. Those who've stayed near the ruins for more than a few hours often describe the same progression. It begins with unease, a sense of being watched, the hair on the back of the neck rising for no clear reason. Then the forest seems to close in, soundless except for the faint rustle of leaves that move though the air is still. Some hear the soft tapping of rain on windows that aren't there. Others claim the smell of smoke drifts through the trees, sharp and sweet, like burning sugar. And always, at the edge of hearing, the low hum returns, a broken lullaby that seems to come from the ground itself. A psychologist who studied these reports suggested it's the mind reacting to isolation and expectation. When people walk into a place convinced it's haunted, the brain fills the silence with ghosts. Yet even she admitted one thing unsettled her. During her own visit to the site, she wore noise-canceling headphones, confident that suggestion alone couldn't touch her. But when she played the audio back, a faint voice appeared under the static, repeating her name. She hadn't introduced herself aloud, hadn't spoken at all. The timestamp on the recording? 3:17 a.m. She left the project the next day, saying only, "The forest remembers what you bring into it." Locals say the land around the orphanage isn't haunted, it's hungry. They tell newcomers that the woods borrow things, voices, memories, even warmth. Visitors describe sudden drops in temperature, breath fogging even on warm nights, and a pulsing vibration underfoot, like something moving deep underground. Electronic devices fail, but old analog recorders, those with magnetic tape, sometimes capture faint giggles or the creak of bed springs. A few recordings include what sounds like the Reverend's voice reading scripture, followed by the soft sobs of children. Experts claim interference. Believers call it proof. The longer someone stays, the worse it becomes. Shadows seem to bend at impossible angles, and the humming grows louder until it drowns out thought. A man named Eli Turner, who spent a single night camped near the ruins in 2019, said he woke to find dozens of small handprints pressed into the fabric of his tent. The prints were warm. He drove straight to the nearest town and swore he'd never return. What the land takes, it never fully gives back. For those who listen too long, the whispers follow home, through doorways, down hallways, and into dreams. By 2020, interest in the orphanage's legend surged again when a team of university researchers attempted to study the site using modern environmental sensors. Their plan was to gather measurable data, magnetic fields, temperature gradients, air density, to prove once and for all that the strange experiences could be explained by natural causes. They installed cameras and recorders around the perimeter of the ruins, each set to run overnight. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., every device malfunctioned simultaneously. Batteries drained to zero. Hard drives wiped. The temperature monitors froze at 17 degrees Celsius, even though the night was nearly freezing. When the team returned the next morning, the equipment was still there, untouched, yet covered in a thin layer of soot. They found no signs of a fire. One of the lead researchers, Dr. Adrian Keene, later told a local paper that he had reviewed the fragments of corrupted footage. On one camera, a single frame had survived the wipe, a shadow, child-sized, standing at the far edge of the frame. Behind it, the faint outline of what looked like a cross glowing faintly in the air. He dismissed it publicly as lens flare, but in private emails, later leaked to journalists, he wrote, "I think it was looking directly at us." Within a month, he resigned from the project and moved overseas. He never spoke about the orphanage again. Other scientists tried to follow up, but each effort ended the same way. Equipment failed, data vanished, or team members backed out midway through. One group from a paranormal research organization placed motion sensors along the trail leading to the orphanage ruins. The sensors triggered repeatedly between 3 o'clock and 3:17 a.m., though no figures appeared on camera. A heat map revealed dozens of small shapes clustering near the chapel's foundation, each no larger than a child. When the team returned to retrieve the devices, they found them stacked neatly in a pile, cords tied in knots. None of them admitted touching the equipment. Eventually, the state closed off the area entirely, citing erosion and trespassing hazards. But word spread quickly that deeper reasons existed, that certain officials wanted the site undisturbed because strange things had begun happening to those who tampered with it. Lights flickering in their homes, phones ringing at 3:17 a.m. with no one on the other end. One official confessed that every time he drove past Gore Road, his car radio picked up the same static hum, the same pattern recorded decades earlier in the orphanage's hymn. Whether it's coincidence or curse, no one can say. What's clear is that every attempt to explain the legend only seems to feed it. Those who've investigated the orphanage long enough say it isn't just a place, it's a contagion of the mind. The first symptoms are small: sleeplessness, unease, a pull to return to the ruins even after leaving. Then come the dreams. Always the same corridor, lined with doors that never open, and the distant hum of children singing a hymn no one remembers learning. A few researchers kept journals during their studies, and their handwriting slowly deteriorates as the pages progress, letters slanting, words merging, as though their thoughts were being rewritten by another hand. Psychiatrists call it dissociation brought on by obsession. Others say it's mimicry, the orphanage imprinting itself through memory. Dr. Keene, before vanishing from public life, sent one final email to a colleague that read, "It's not the children who are trapped there. It's the echo." When pressed for meaning, he never replied. Another researcher, Evelyn Cross, who'd previously examined the Reverend's letters, confessed to hearing footsteps on the paper while reading old transcripts. She described it as if the words themselves moved when she wasn't looking. A recording of her final lecture captures her voice trembling as she said, "Maybe the light of hope was never a building. It was a threshold. And we keep walking through it." That was her last public appearance. She resigned the next day, citing mental exhaustion. The deeper investigators dig, the more they report an identical feeling, that something in the story watches back. Cameras malfunction only when pointed at the heart of the ruins. GPS devices lose signal exactly within a 17-meter radius. Psychologists analyzing the data noticed another pattern, the number 17 appearing again and again. 17 degrees, 17 minutes, 3:17 a.m. It's as if the legend itself operates on that rhythm, pulsing like a heartbeat that refuses to fade. In interviews, those affected describe the same auditory hallucination. Children humming lead us into light. One investigator admitted that the hum followed him home, first faintly, then louder, until he couldn't sleep without white noise to drown it out. His final report ends abruptly. If it's psychological, then why does the sound stop when I pray? Skeptics argue that stress, environmental factors, and suggestion explain everything. Yet none can deny the eerie consistency. The Ohio Orphanage has become more than a mystery. It's a mirror, reflecting the fears of anyone who dares to look too closely. And every reflection, it seems, hums the same tune. In 2022, a final attempt was made to document the orphanage before the site was permanently sealed. A small production team, 2 filmmakers and a sound engineer, received permission from the local historical society to film for one night only. Their plan was simple: capture the ruins, record ambient sound, and end decades of speculation with clear footage. They arrived just before midnight. The woods were unusually still. In the raw recordings, you can hear their footsteps crunching over leaves, their voices low, nervous, trying to sound professional. They set up near what was once the chapel foundation. Everything worked perfectly until 3:17 a.m. The footage shows the air thickening, fog rolling in from the river though the weather report predicted none. Then, one by one, their cameras began shutting off. You can hear the crew arguing softly in the dark. And then a child's voice whispers near the microphone, "Don't leave us." When the fog cleared, one of the filmmakers, Lena Morris, was gone. The others searched for hours, calling her name until sunrise. They found her camera upright on the ground, recording. The final frame shows the forest empty except for a faint glow moving between the trees, small points of light, drifting in a slow circle like children holding candles. The sound cuts to static, then to a single voice whispering light. Investigators combed the area for days, finding no footprints, no signs of struggle. Lena was never found. The case remains open, officially marked as missing in natural area. Unofficially, it's another chapter in a story that refuses to die. When authorities reviewed the equipment, they found something chilling. Every timestamp froze at 3:17 a.m. and repeated for 17 frames before resuming. Forensic analysts couldn't replicate the glitch, even after testing the same cameras under identical conditions. One officer who handled the footage reported hearing children's laughter faintly in his patrol car afterward. He laughed it off to his partner, until the dashcam recording from that night captured the same sound. He quit the force within the month. After Lena's disappearance, the state fenced off the site and filled the old foundations with concrete. Yet visitors claim the ground still glows faintly at night beneath the new soil, as if light still burns beneath the surface. Officially, there is nothing left to see, but locals say otherwise. They say that if you walk far enough down Gore Road, stop, and listen past the sound of the wind, you'll hear it again, that soft, steady humming. It never fades, only waits. Every generation brings new skeptics, new believers, new names on the list of those who disappeared chasing the same question. What really happened to the children of the light of hope? Today, the ruins of the orphanage are little more than a ghost story told around campfires, yet its shadow still stretches across Ohio. Families who live nearby leave lanterns on their porches every October. For the ones still wandering, they say. Teachers warn students not to take the old trail after dark. Even hardened skeptics admit there's something different about the air on Gore Road. Dense, charged, as if filled with memories refusing to settle. Psychologists call it mass suggestion. Locals call it the hum. It seeps into conversation, dreams, and the edges of consciousness like background static. And always, that same number, 17, finds a way to appear, in clocks, receipts, even license plates. Coincidence, maybe, or a pattern left by something that once believed 17 meant salvation. Historians still argue over what really happened inside the light of hope. Some say neglect and disease. Others hint at darker truths, a fire never documented, an epidemic quietly covered up. But the official records remain frustratingly blank, whole pages missing from county archives. One archivist admitted that certain documents just don't stay filed. He replaces them, they vanish again. He's begun leaving them untouched, saying, maybe they don't want to be read. The legend has grown into something self-sustaining, feeding on curiosity and fear. The more people search for answers, the stronger it seems to get, as though every retelling is another offering to the past. Across Ohio, people claim to encounter echoes of the orphanage far from its ruins. A family in Cleveland reported children's laughter coming from their basement after finding an old brick-marked light of hope. A woman in Toledo said her daughter began humming an unfamiliar tune at night, the same lullaby once sung by the orphans. None of these stories can be proven, yet they keep coming. It's as if the legend is no longer bound to the forest, but has bled into the collective memory of the region itself. A haunting not of ghosts, but of ideas, of grief so deep it carved itself into the soil and refused to fade. Some locals believe that by speaking of it, we keep the children alive. Others warn that talking about them invites their presence. But silence hasn't helped. Even after the site was sealed, hikers still hear faint whispers beneath the wind. The hum persists, weaving through static, seeping into recordings. It's no longer a question of whether the orphanage was haunted. The real question is whether it ever truly stopped existing. Because perhaps, in some way, it never did. Perhaps it lives on in those who can't stop asking what happened, and in those who dare to listen. Every legend, they say, begins as a wound. The Light of Hope Orphanage may have started as a sanctuary, but it ended as a scar carved into the landscape of Ohio, a reminder of what happens when suffering is forgotten. Even the most skeptical historians admit that many children who passed through its doors were never accounted for. Their names fade between censored documents and erased ledgers. No graves, no photographs, only whispers and dusty records. It's this void, the absence of truth, that keeps the legend alive. People don't fear ghosts. They fear the silence left in their place. And the Ohio Orphanage is a silence that screams. Modern filmmakers, podcasters, and researchers continue to chase its shadow, yet each one comes away changed. They speak of dreams filled with flickering lights, of voices calling from dark hallways, of waking to find soot under their fingernails. None can explain it. Some call it mass hysteria, others, collective memory manifesting through guilt. But deep down, everyone who's gone there admits to feeling the same pull, the sense that the story isn't over, that something still waits to be found. And in that way, the orphanage endures not as a structure, but as a mirror held up to those who dare to remember what the world prefers to forget. You can't visit Ohio without someone mentioning it. In diners, in gas stations, whispered between locals when outsiders ask about Gore Road. Everyone has a story or knows someone who does. A brother who heard children's voices. A cousin who saw lights move through the trees. A traveler who took a single brick home as a souvenir and later begged to return it. They say the bricks hum if you hold them to your ear, the sound faint but steady, like a heartbeat. People who hear it once never seem to forget the rhythm. It follows them, like an unfinished song. What's most unsettling isn't that the legend persists, but that it evolves. Every retelling adds a detail, a new voice, a new disappearance. As if the story itself is alive, feeding on attention. The more it's told, the stronger it becomes, reshaping itself for each generation. Maybe that's the real curse of the orphanage. Not the ghosts of children trapped in the ruins, but the way their story binds to anyone who listens too closely. And if you've come this far, if you're still here, listening now, you've already heard the hum too. You just haven't realized it yet. Some stories never end, because we won't let them. The legend of the Ohio Orphanage isn't just about haunted grounds or vanished children. It's about how grief anchors itself in the human soul. The Light of Hope began as a promise, but promises can rot if left in the dark. When you stand at the edge of those woods, the air feels heavier, as though every breath stirs the ashes of the past. The silence there isn't empty, it's listening, waiting. Every gust of wind feels like a question. Will you remember us? The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened. Fires fade, paper burns, people forget. But memory finds a way to return. Maybe that's why people still hear the hum, why cameras still flicker, why every generation swears they've seen lights moving between the trees. It's not the dead reaching out to us. It's the living reaching into the dark, hoping to find meaning in the echo. Because somewhere, deep beneath the concrete and moss, the light of hope still flickers. Faint, relentless, waiting for another name to be added to its story. So the next time you drive down Gore Road, don't stop. Don't look too long into the trees. Because the forest remembers faces. It remembers footsteps. And it remembers those who came seeking answers and never left. Some say the hum you hear isn't the voices of the lost. It's the sound of the past refusing to let go. Others believe it's a warning. Whatever it is, if you listen too closely, you might find it follows you home. Thank you for walking with me into the shadows tonight. If you felt the chill, if you sensed the hum, you've already become part of the story. Don't forget to subscribe to Historic Book, where the past never truly rests, and every whisper leads to another forgotten truth. Until next time, keep your lights close, your doors locked, and your curiosity just a little afraid. Because sometimes, the most haunted places aren't the ones we visit, they're the ones that follow us home.